After my sister locked me in the freezing basement for 14 hours, my mother said, "Stop overreacting. It was just a prank." But when the doctor checked me out and saw the security footage, she said something that left them freezing. "Sup, Reddit. Strap in and get some snacks. This one's real messed up. I'm Mason, 28 make. My sister Mallory was 33 at the time. Growing up, Mallory was the golden child, and I was whatever orbited around her trying not to get burned. Firstborn. Daddy's little princess, at least according to our mother, Judith. Homecoming queen. Captain of the dance team. The kind of girl who peaked at 17 and spent the next 16 years trying to recreate that magic. Judith treated Mallory like royalty and me like a participation trophy. Every holiday card featured Mallory prominently. Every family story somehow circled back to something Mallory had accomplished. When I graduated valedictorian from high school, Judith managed to turn the dinner conversation into a discussion about Mallory's engagement photos. The woman could change subjects faster than a politician dodging questions. My father tried to balance things out. Gene is the kind of man who shows love through actions rather than words. He came to every one of my baseball games, even though Judith complained about missing Mallory's dance recitals. He taught me to fish, to change a tire, to read financial statements. He was present in ways that mattered, even when Judith made it difficult. But Gene wasn't built for confrontation. He'd been raised to keep the peace, avoid conflict, let sleeping dogs lie. So when Judith steamrolled over my achievements or dismissed my accomplishments, he'd shoot me apologetic looks but rarely intervene. It wasn't malicious. He just didn't know how to fight for me without blowing up his marriage. That changed after the basement. But we'll get there. Mallory got married at 22 to a guy named Boyd who sold insurance and had the personality of a wet napkin. Had 3 kids in 4 years. Moved into a house she couldn't afford, in a neighborhood she wanted people to think she belonged in, and slowly started drowning in a life that looked great on Instagram and miserable everywhere else. Meanwhile, I did the opposite of peak early. Got my act together in college. Studied accounting because I liked things that added up and made sense, unlike my family. Met my wife, Harper, at a coffee shop when she told me my laptop screensaver was aggressively boring. Harper's the kind of woman who doesn't take nonsense from anyone, including me, especially me. When we first started dating and I mentioned that I'd been covering my sister's bills for years, she looked at me like I'd grown a second head, asked me to explain the math. When I finished, she just said, "Wait, so you're basically bankrolling someone who treats you like garbage just because you share parents?" I didn't have a good answer. The money situation with Mallory started small. 200 here, 300 there. Always with a good excuse. Boyd's commission was delayed. The kids needed something. Car trouble. Every time I covered it because that's what brothers do. Or that's what I told myself. $12,000 over 4 years. I tracked it eventually. Not a single penny repaid. And the one time I asked about getting some of it back, Mallory acted like I'd asked her to donate a kidney. How could I be so selfish? Didn't I know how hard her life was? When I finally cut her off, she stopped speaking to me for 2 months. Then she started again, but only when she needed something or wanted to make a passive-aggressive comment at family gatherings. The basement incident happened on Thanksgiving weekend. Harper and I drove 5 hours from our place in Columbus to my hometown of Branton, Ohio. My father had organized the whole gathering because I'd just made junior partner at my firm. Youngest partner in the Columbus office's history, which isn't the same as youngest ever at a Big Four, but for a regional firm it meant something. He wanted to celebrate. Here's the thing I didn't realize at the time. Making junior partner meant more access, more oversight responsibilities. And I'd casually mentioned to Mallory on the phone 3 weeks earlier that I was helping Dad organize his estate documents. Just family stuff. Consolidating accounts. She'd asked if I'd be pulling credit reports. I said probably, just to make sure nothing weird was going on. Her voice had gotten tight. She laughed and changed the subject. I should have paid attention, but I was busy with work and didn't think much of it. She got that information 3 weeks before Thanksgiving. 3 weeks before she bought a deadbolt from a hardware store 40 miles away. Plenty of time to plan. My buddy Caleb came along for the holiday because he'd been staying with us after his divorce and had nowhere else to go. Caleb is the kind of friend everyone needs, but nobody wants to explain to their parents. 6'4", perpetually wearing basketball shorts regardless of weather or occasion, and about as socially aware as a golden retriever. His divorce had been finalized 3 months earlier after his wife decided she wanted to find herself, which apparently required finding herself in their neighbor's bedroom. He'd moved in with us during the separation, about 6 months ago now, and Caleb handled everything by eating cereal for dinner and watching conspiracy documentaries until Harper intervened and gave him a room. He was supposed to be temporary. Now he's basically furniture that occasionally makes sandwiches. Wednesday evening when we arrived, Mallory was already there. She met me at the door with a hug that lasted 2 seconds too long. Asked about the drive, asked about work. Harper gave me a look, the one that means she's filing something away to bring up later. That night, Mallory found me alone in the kitchen getting water. Mentioned casually that I should leave my phone charging during family time. Said it was rude to be checking work emails constantly. Said the basement had terrible signal anyway, so I might as well keep my phone on the counter if I needed to go down there for any reason. Weird thing to mention. I filed it away and forgot about it. Caleb pulled me aside that first night. Dude, your sister's being weird. She asked me like 3 questions about you and 0 questions about literally anything else. That's not normal. I told him he was paranoid. Told myself the same thing. Turns out we were both stupid. Thanksgiving dinner was a masterclass in family dysfunction. Every time someone mentioned my promotion, Mallory changed the subject. When my father stood up to make a toast, she suddenly remembered her youngest needed something in the other room. Judith kept shooting her sympathetic looks, like Mallory was the one suffering through this ordeal. But there was one moment that stuck with me later. Mallory mentioned that she'd heard identity theft was really common these days. And didn't Dad worry about that? Gene said he wasn't worried. Said he had Mason looking over things now. Said having an accountant in the family was better than any fraud protection service. I watched Mallory's face when he said that. Something changed in her expression. Couldn't put my finger on it at the time. The kids weren't helping matters. Mallory's 3 children ranged from 8 to 4, and they had the energy of caffeinated squirrels. Every time the conversation turned to me, one of them would need something, knock something over, or start crying. After the 3rd interruption, I started wondering if Mallory had trained them to cause distractions on command. Harper's hand found mine under the table. She squeezed once. Our signal for, I see this nonsense too and we're discussing it later. My father finally got his toast in during dessert. He stood up, cleared his throat, and said he was proud of me. That watching me build a career through hard work was one of the great joys of his life. That I was the kind of man he'd hoped I'd become. Judith stared at her plate. Mallory excused herself to the bathroom. The moment was ruined, but Dad finished anyway. After dessert, Mallory cornered me in the kitchen while I was getting coffee. Asked about the estate review I'd mentioned. How far along was I? Had I looked at credit reports yet? Dad specifically? Why would I look at yours? I asked. She laughed way too hard. Said she'd just been joking. Said I was always so serious. Then she mentioned that she'd been thinking about refinancing. Asked if I could look at her mortgage documents sometime. Said I'd probably understand the numbers better than she could. I said sure, maybe after the holidays. She nodded, but her eyes didn't match the smile. Friday morning, Mallory found me in the kitchen making coffee. She had that smile, the one she used to wear right before she'd get me in trouble when we were kids. Dad wandered in while I was pouring my second cup. Asked if I'd had a chance to look at that bank letter he'd mentioned. Some notice about a credit inquiry he didn't recognize. I told him I'd pull his credit report after breakfast, see what was going on. Mallory was standing by the refrigerator. I didn't notice her face change. Didn't notice the way her hand tightened on the door handle. 20 minutes later, she asked about the sump pump. Hey, it's making this weird noise, she said. Can you go check it out? Boyd threw out his back and Dad shouldn't be climbing those stairs. Reasonable request. The basement in my parents' place was old and unfinished. Stone walls, exposed pipes, that musty smell of old Ohio basements everywhere. I grabbed a flashlight and headed for the basement door. Left my inhaler on the counter. Phone too. Mallory had suggested keeping it charging anyway, and I was just going down for a minute. What could go wrong? The stairs creaked under my weight. The basement was freezing. November in Ohio means temperatures in the 30s at night, and that basement had no heat source. Just cold concrete and whatever warmth leaked down from above. The temperature gauge near the old furnace read 37 degrees. I found the sump pump. Looked fine. Sounded fine. No weird noises. I turned to call up to Mallory and ask what exactly she'd heard. The door slammed. The lock clicked. I took the stairs 2 at a time and threw my shoulder against the wood. Wouldn't budge. Someone had installed a deadbolt on the outside. Heavy-duty brass hardware that definitely hadn't been there on my last visit. Mallory! I yelled. What is this? Nothing. Then music started upstairs. Loud. The kind of volume that drowns out inconvenient sounds. I pounded on the door until my fists were raw. Tried the windows, but they were the old fixed kind that don't open. Found a piece of pipe and tried to break the glass, but the angle was wrong and I couldn't get enough force. Checked every wall for another exit. Nothing. Just stone and cold and that one door with its brand new lock. My chest was already tightening. Panic plus cold air is basically asthma's favorite combo. Every breath was getting harder. I sat down on the stairs and tried to control my breathing, which is hilarious when you're trapped in a freezing basement and your sister just tried to kill you. By hour 2, the cold had seeped through my clothes completely. Jeans and a flannel shirt don't do much against mid-30s temperatures when you're sitting on concrete. The gauge showed 35 degrees and dropping as night settled in. I found a moth-eaten blanket on a shelf and wrapped it around myself. Dragged some flattened cardboard boxes to make a barrier between me and the floor. Found old newspapers in a box and stuffed them inside my shirt for insulation. The paper crinkled every time I moved. I also discovered that if I curled into a ball and tucked my hands into my armpits, the shaking slowed down. It helped, barely. The difference between dying in 8 hours and dying in 16. I kept moving, paced the basement until my legs burned, did jumping jacks until my breathing got too bad. Every time I felt drowsy, I forced myself to stand. Drowsy and hypothermia means your body is shutting down. By hour 4, I'd stopped yelling. My throat was shredded. The wheezing had gotten bad. I wrapped myself tighter in that blanket and wedged myself against the wall near the furnace, which provided zero warmth because it only heated the floors above. I tried everything else too. Banged on the pipes hoping someone would hear. Attempted to pick the lock with a piece of wire from an old picture frame. Tried to pry the door hinges loose with a screwdriver I found in a toolbox. Nothing worked. Around hour 6, I started coughing. The deep kind that feels like your lungs are trying to escape through your throat. My airways were closing up. No inhaler, no help coming, no way out. The hallucinations started around hour 9. My grandmother, who died when I was 12, sitting on an old chair telling me to rest. Harper's voice from somewhere I couldn't locate. Shadows moving in ways shadows don't move. I knew what was happening. Hypothermia messes with your brain, makes you confused, makes you see things, makes you want to lie down and sleep even though sleep is death. I made peace with dying around hour 10. Not dramatically, just quietly accepted that this was probably it. Nobody was coming. That thought kept circling. Why? Why now? What was so urgent that she couldn't just avoid me for another few years? The promotion wasn't that big a deal. The estate review was just paperwork. Unless there was something in that paperwork she didn't want me to see. I thought about all those questions she'd asked. Credit reports, account access, audits. When would I be looking at Dad's financials? The pieces were there. I just couldn't put them together through the hypothermia fog. By hour 12, I'd started talking to myself, reciting state capitals, counting backwards from 1,000. Anything to keep my brain active, keep myself from slipping into that final sleep. I did the alphabet backwards. Named every player on the 2016 Cubs roster. Made myself solve multiplication problems in my head. The math was the hardest. Cold does something to your brain. Numbers that should be easy become impossible. 12 times 7 felt like solving quantum physics. But I kept at it because stopping meant dying. I thought about Harper. Wondered if she'd gotten that fake text and believed it. Wondered if she was sitting upstairs right now, watching football, having no idea her husband was freezing to death 20 feet below her. The cover story was clever. I'll give Mallory that much. About 20 minutes after locking me in, she went upstairs and announced I'd gotten a work emergency call. Had to leave immediately. She'd watched me drive off in such a hurry I didn't even say goodbye. She'd grabbed my phone from the kitchen counter, sent Harper a text saying, "Work emergency, heading back early, explain later, love you." Then deleted the sent message and put the phone back near my coffee cup. Even texted my work partner with some vague excuse about a family issue. Harper was confused, but not worried. She knew my job. End of year in accounting meant emergencies happened. She figured I'd call when I could. She even apologized to Mallory for my sudden departure. My father was annoyed. He'd planned this whole dinner for me, made a special trip to get the good steaks. And I just left without a word? He asked Mallory if I'd seemed upset. She said I'd gotten a call and my face went pale. Must have been serious. Judith jumped in immediately. "That's Mason for you. Always putting work first. No respect for family." The day continued normally for everyone upstairs. Nobody checked the basement. Nobody wondered why my car was still in the driveway even though I'd supposedly driven away. Mallory kept everyone busy, kept the house loud, kept steering people away from that door. Caleb wandered into the kitchen around hour 3 looking for snacks. He noticed my phone on the counter, then noticed my inhaler next to it, then noticed my car still in the driveway. "Yo, did Mason walk to work or something?" he asked the room. Nobody answered, but something about it nagged at him. He told me later he kept thinking about it while watching football. Mason left for a work emergency without his phone or his inhaler. He doesn't go anywhere without that inhaler. By hour 8, I'd stopped shivering. My body had given up trying to warm itself. Severe hypothermia territory. The kind where people lie down in the snow and never get up. My thoughts were getting fuzzy. Disconnected. I'd drift off and jerk awake, confused about where I was. The basement seemed to shift around me. The door crashed open around hour 14. Not opened. Crashed. My father had kicked it in when the deadbolt wouldn't turn from his key. He is 62 years old with a bad knee and high blood pressure. He kicked that door so hard the frame splintered. 3 kicks. 4th one sent it flying open. I've never seen him move that fast. He found me curled up against the wall, barely conscious. Blue-lipped and not shivering, which is worse than shivering. Started screaming for help. Carried me up the stairs himself despite the bad knee, despite the fact that I'm 6 feet and 180. Mallory was standing in the kitchen when he emerged with me in his arms. Her face went white. Then she started babbling about how she thought I'd left. She had no idea. Why was I in the basement? This didn't make any sense. Caleb stepped between her and my father, blocking her path. His face looked different than I'd ever seen it. "You knew," he said. Just those 2 words. Then he turned and helped get me to the couch while Harper called 911. My father held me while we waited for the ambulance, kept talking to me, telling me to stay awake, apologizing for not checking sooner. Judith stood in the corner, looking like she was calculating how this would affect the family Christmas card. Turns out Caleb had finally put the pieces together earlier that evening. Went to find Harper. Asked if she'd actually seen me leave. She hadn't. Asked if anyone had seen me drive away. Mallory had, supposedly. But my car was still outside. Harper went white. She knew something Caleb didn't. That Mallory had been asking odd questions for weeks. Finance questions. Audit questions. They started searching the house. Harper checked the garage. Caleb checked the backyard with a flashlight, which was stupid because why would I be hiding behind a shed? But that's Caleb. Thorough in the weirdest ways. He went room by room, checked closets, checked the attic. He was the one who finally said out loud what everyone was dancing around. Check the basement. My father checked the basement. The ambulance got there in 11 minutes. I remember sirens, oxygen masks, people shouting numbers I didn't understand. Harper's face, white with terror, holding my hand and telling me to stay with her. I woke up in Branton Regional Medical Center, surrounded by machines and heat lamps, and a doctor whose expression suggested she'd already figured out some things about how I'd ended up there. Dr. Vivian Reeves was a woman in her 50s who'd clearly seen enough sketchy injuries to recognize when something wasn't adding up. She stood at the foot of my bed reading my chart with cold focus. Core temperature of 91 degrees. Severe hypothermia. Acute asthma attack triggered by cold air and panic. Oxygen levels that had dropped to dangerous territory. Frostbite on multiple fingers and toes. The works. She asked me what happened. I told her every detail. Doctor. Reeves asked about my asthma, when I'd last used my inhaler, what my triggers were. I explained that cold air was a big one. So was stress. So was being trapped in a freezing basement. She didn't smile, just nodded and said she was calling the police. Your sister knew about your asthma? She's known since I was diagnosed at 12. She used to hide my inhaler as a prank when we were teenagers. Dr. Reeves's expression suggested she had some strong opinions about what should happen to Mallory. She left to make her calls. Detective Garza showed up an hour later. Mid-40s, sharp eyes, the kind of cop who'd been lied to by so many people she could smell nonsense from across a room. Her partner was a younger guy named Wheeler, who took notes and stayed quiet. I gave my statement, told them about the money I'd loaned Mallory, the dinner celebrating my promotion, the weird behavior, the questions about audits and finances, the suggestion to leave my phone and inhaler on the counter, the sump pump excuse, the deadbolt. Detective Garza's eyebrows went up when I mentioned the financial questions. She specifically asked about audits, about what you might find in records. Yeah, multiple times. Asked about credit reports, account access, when I'd be reviewing my father's documents. And you're an accountant. Junior partner. Yes. She and Wheeler exchanged a look I couldn't read. She asked if we could review the security footage. My father had installed cameras 2 years back after some break-ins. They covered the first floor, including the kitchen and hallway near the basement door. My dad provided everything within the hour. He came to my hospital room afterward, looking like a man who just watched his world fall apart. She checked the lock 6 times, he said, his voice shaky. 6 times in 14 hours. She'd walk to the door, put her ear against it, test the handle, and walk away. I watched my daughter do that while my son was dying. Harper was in the room. When Jean described what he'd seen, she grabbed my hand so hard I thought she'd break my fingers. The footage showed other things too. Mallory grabbing my phone and typing. Mallory telling everyone I'd left. Mallory positioning herself near the stereo, keeping the music loud, suggesting movies, getting the kids to play noisy games. Every time the house got quiet, she found a reason to make it loud again. And Judith helping. Not knowingly, probably. But she'd validated everything Mallory said. Agreed that I was always putting work first. Made it easier for everyone to believe I'd just ditched. The police arrested Mallory that evening. She cried. Said it was a misunderstanding. A prank that went wrong. She'd meant to let me out after an hour, but got distracted. The footage showed her checking the lock at hour 2, hour 5, hour 8, hour 11, hour 13. You don't lose track of time and check 6 times. But here's where it got interesting. Detective Garza called me 2 days later. Her voice was different. We found some stuff at your sister's house during the search, she said. Boyd agreed to let us search the whole place. I need to ask you some questions about your father's finances. They'd found documents in Mallory's home office. A credit application for a business loan with Jean's social security number. Forged signature. The business didn't exist, but the loan had been approved 8 months earlier. $42,000. They'd found records from Mallory's time chairing the church fundraiser. Donation logs that didn't match what the church had deposited. Small skims over several years totaling over $18,000. They'd found credit cards in Boyd's name that Boyd didn't know existed. Hidden statements showing purchases and cash advances. $63,000 in balances. They got a warrant for her phone after the footage came in. The forensic poll showed searches like basement temperature overnight November and how cold is dangerous hypothermia and asthma attack cold air how long. Dated across a 2-week span ending 3 days before Thanksgiving. Not smoking gun obvious. But when you stack it next to the deadbolt receipt and the timing of when she learned I'd be pulling Dad's credit report, the picture got clear fast. The hardware store had security cameras. Mallory paid cash, but she'd also bought a kitchen timer on the same receipt. The timer was never found. Detective Garza figured she'd used it to track how long I'd been down there. She laid it out for me. Mallory wasn't just jealous of my promotion. She was terrified of it. A junior partner with access to financial records, a brother about to review their father's accounts, an accountant who would absolutely notice a fraudulent loan taken out in Dad's name, who would spot irregular credit inquiries, who would start asking questions that Mallory couldn't answer. The basement wasn't about stealing my thunder at Thanksgiving dinner. It was about stopping me from doing my job. If I died down there or even been incapacitated for weeks, Mallory would have had time. Time to destroy the loan documents. Time to close the hidden accounts. Time to fix the church records before anyone looked too closely. Time to make sure the one person in the family who could read financial statements never got the chance. The charges got upgraded to attempted murder. They added kidnapping, unlawful restraint, and identity theft. Her prank defense fell apart. The fallout was immediate and ugly. Judith came to the hospital the day after the upgraded charges. Not to check on me. To demand I drop everything. Think about what you're doing to this family, she said. Your sister has children, a reputation. You're going to destroy all of that over a misunderstanding? I stared at her. My fingers were bandaged. My toes were bandaged. A machine was helping me breathe. She was looking up cold exposure timelines and asthma risks for weeks before locking me in there. She stole $42,000 using Dad's identity. That's not a misunderstanding. You're exaggerating. You always exaggerate. Harper stood up slowly from the corner. Get out, Harper said. Not loud. Just cold. Judith sputtered. Said she had every right to visit her own son. Yeah, I get it. Your daughter tried to Kyle your son to cover up financial fraud, and you're here defending her. And if you don't leave this room in the next 10 seconds, I'm calling security and having you removed. Judith left. Called me ungrateful on her way out. My father filed for divorce 3 days later. 34 years of marriage? Done. He told me later that watching the security footage had broken something in him. Seeing Mallory check that lock. Seeing Judith immediately take her side. The next few months were chaos. I went through 3 surgeries. Lost the tips of 2 toes on my left foot and half of 1 finger on my right hand to frostbite. The doctors said the wet concrete floor was the killer. My socks had soaked through from the damp near the sump pit, and 14 hours of cold, wet feet on stone did the damage. Spent months in physical therapy learning to walk properly again. My lung function dropped permanently. I went from moderate asthma to severe. The investigation expanded as detectives followed the money. Total damage across all her schemes. Over $125,000 in fraud. The loan in Dad's name. The church skimming. The credit cards in Boyd's name. An insurance claim for storm damage that never happened. Boyd filed for divorce during the trial preparation. He came to visit me in the hospital, sat in the chair next to my bed, and said he was sorry. I think she hated you because you could see through her act, Boyd said. Everyone else bought it. You didn't. And when you became the guy who could actually prove what she was doing, she lost it. He got full custody, moved the kids to Indiana, cut all contact with Judith. Caleb appointed himself my unofficial bodyguard during recovery, drove me to appointments, screened calls, physically blocked Judith when she tried to show up at our apartment once. The trial took 8 months to reach. The prosecution had everything: pattern evidence from my childhood, the hypothermia searches, the deadbolt receipt, the security footage, Dr. Reeves testifying about how close I'd come to dying, expert witnesses on premeditation, and the financial evidence showing motive, painting a picture of a woman so deep in fraud that murder seemed like the logical next step. Mallory's defense tried everything. It was a prank. She'd forgotten. She had anxiety and depression and wasn't thinking clearly. She'd been provoked by my arrogance about the promotion. Her lawyer, some guy named Pendleton, who specialized in getting wealthy suburban clients off on reduced charges, argued that the hypothermia searches were just curiosity, that the deadbolt was for child safety, that the timing was coincidental. The prosecution put Boyd on the stand. He testified about discovering the hidden credit cards after the arrest, about the forged signatures on loan applications, about years of financial deception he'd been completely blind to. He broke down twice. First, when he described finding the statements. Second, when the prosecutor asked if he'd noticed any warning signs. He said Mallory had been sleeping poorly for weeks before Thanksgiving, kept checking her phone, snapped at the kids over nothing. He thought it was holiday stress. The church treasurer testified about the fundraiser irregularities, showed the donation records versus the deposit records, $18,000 that went somewhere other than where it was supposed to go. Dad testified about the loan he'd never applied for, $42,000, borrowed against his name for a business that didn't exist. His voice cracked when the prosecutor asked how it felt to learn his daughter had stolen his identity. The jury watched all the evidence. They connected the dots the same way Detective Garza had. Mallory wasn't jealous. She was cornered, guilty on all counts. Attempted murder, kidnapping, identity theft, 10 to 15 years. The fraud and forgery charges from Dad's loan got rolled into a plea deal that added restitution requirements on top of the prison time. Judith screamed in the courtroom, called me a monster, said I'd destroyed the family. Security had to escort her out. She tried to lunge at the prosecutor on her way through the doors. Harper waited until after the sentencing to make her move. See, this is why I married her. During the trial and divorce proceedings, she'd been quietly building a file. Discovery documents gave her a roadmap of financial irregularities. Boyd shared everything he'd found: bank statements, tax returns, credit card charges that didn't match anything in their household budget. Harper cross-referenced it all. The detective work had exposed the major frauds, but Harper found the smaller ones. The patterns that didn't rise to criminal charges, but absolutely violated civil agreements and organizational policies. She bought a whiteboard, kept it in the spare room, lines connecting names to accounts to dates. She'd add to it after the kids went to bed, building cases that prosecutors couldn't touch because they were civil and organizational. She found additional evidence of the church fundraiser skimming, enough documentation to ensure Mallory would be formally expelled and required to pay full restitution. She found enough irregularities in the insurance claim to trigger a full fraud investigation by Boyd's former employer. They wanted their money back plus damages plus legal fees. She found the trail connecting the identity theft loan to additional credit inquiries Mallory had made in Dad's name. Minor stuff individually, but collectively enough to generate a formal identity theft report that would follow Mallory forever. Harper submitted anonymous tips to 3 separate entities: the Church Finance Committee, the insurance company's fraud hotline, and the bank's security department. Enough specific details that they'd have to investigate, but nothing traceable back to her. "What did you do?" I asked when she told me. "Just pointed people in the right direction," she said, not looking up from her laptop. "They did their own audits. I just gave them reasons to look." Then she waited. The church launched an investigation that led to Mallory being formally expelled from the congregation. Her entire social network evaporated. The women she'd brunched with, the families she'd carpooled with, all gone overnight. The insurance company filed civil charges. They wanted their money back plus damages. The bank reported the identity theft to law enforcement. Another brick in the wall. Judith's spiral accelerated. Without Mallory to worship and without my father to provide financial stability, she was lost. The divorce settlement had been fair, but not generous. She'd gotten the house, which she couldn't afford to maintain. She'd gotten half the retirement accounts, which she burned through in 2 years on legal fees for Mallory's appeals. The appeals went nowhere. The evidence was too strong, the footage too damning. Every motion got denied. Every argument got rejected. Mallory's lawyer eventually stopped returning Judith's calls, probably because Judith had stopped being able to pay him. She started calling me again, despite the restraining order, crying about how alone she was, how nobody understood what she was going through, how I'd torn apart everything she'd built. I blocked every number she used, changed my phone number. Eventually she gave up, or ran out of phones, or both. Caleb moved out eventually, got his life back together, started dating a woman named Delia who ran a food truck specializing in gourmet burritos. They send us Christmas cards now. Last year's featured Caleb wearing a Santa hat and holding a burrito. It's framed in our hallway. Harper and I relocated to Pittsburgh. New city, fresh start. I took a position at a smaller firm. Less money, less prestige, but also less stress. We bought a house. Got a dog. A ridiculous golden retriever named Walter, who's afraid of his own shadow, but acts tough when squirrels are involved. 2 years after the trial, we had our son. Named him Owen. My father visits twice a year. He's softer now, but present in a way he never was when I was growing up. Mallory served 8 years. Good behavior, completed programs, model prisoner on paper. Got out when I was 37. I'd prepared for this. Had the restraining order renewed annually. Updated my security system. Gave her photo to my office building, my kids' school, my gym. The first year after her release was quiet. I heard through Boyd that Mallory had moved to Arizona, gotten a job at a call center, was living in a small apartment and keeping her head down. Then Judith died. Congestive heart failure. Years of stress and poor health catching up. She'd been alone in that house she couldn't afford, surrounded by photos of a family that no longer existed. A neighbor found her after 3 days. Mallory flew back for the funeral and reached out to me. Letter to my office address. 3 pages about how prison had changed her, how she'd found faith, how she finally understood what she'd done. She wanted a chance to explain. I read it twice, then burned it. She'd become irrelevant. A footnote in a story that had moved on without her. At the funeral, Mallory and I were on opposite sides of the room. Gene didn't come. Said his goodbyes had been said years ago. Boyd brought the kids. Teenagers now, uncomfortable in formal clothes, and clearly unsure what to feel about a grandmother they barely remembered. Mallory tried to approach me after the service. Said she just wanted 5 minutes. Just wanted to apologize properly. Wanted to explain why she'd done what she did. I turned and walked away. She called after me. I kept walking. Harper was waiting in the car with the kids. She'd refused to attend but drove me because she knew I'd need support after. When I got in, she just squeezed my hand. We drove home without discussing it. Some things don't need words. Here's where this story gets satisfying for anyone who's still reading. 6 months after Judith's funeral, Mallory made a mistake. She'd been telling people her version of events for years. How I'd set her up, how the evidence was fabricated, how she'd been wrongly convicted because I was jealous. She told this story to Boyd's new wife, Mariana. Mariana asked Boyd for the truth. He showed her everything. The footage, the phone records, the loan documents, the fraud evidence. Mariana has a large extended family and an active social media presence. She also has zero tolerance for people who lie about abuse. She posted a carefully worded account of what actually happened, complete with links to public court records. Just facts. It made the rounds. Community groups, true crime forums, support networks for abuse survivors. Not national news, but wide enough that Mallory's new life in Arizona got complicated. Once HR saw a violent felony conviction and a stack of restitution orders in her background check, that job didn't survive. Her apartment complex found out. The new church she joined found out. She moved 3 times in 18 months, each place smaller and further from anywhere she'd ever lived. Boyd's oldest kid blocked her number. The middle one followed a month later. Same pattern as before, except this time she couldn't run back home. She called me, screaming, saying I'd ruined her life, saying I'd never let her move on, saying I was obsessed with destroying her. You spent weeks planning to Kyle me so I wouldn't find out you'd stolen over $100,000 from Dad, Boyd, the church, and the insurance company. You don't get to move on. You don't get to rebuild. You get to live with what you did for the rest of your life. I hung up, blocked her number. That was 2 years ago. I don't know where she is now. Don't care. She's not my problem anymore. She's a cautionary tale I'll tell my kids someday about what happens when greed and entitlement go unchecked for decades. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel and help us bring you more and better stories. Thanks.